Every year at exactly 11:58 p.m. Mary on December 31st, the city paused, as if the entire skyline took a breath before the fireworks hit. That night, David stood at his kitchen window and watched the frost crawl up the glass like silver veins. He'd promised himself this New Year's Eve would be different, brighter somehow, even if the tree was a thrift store find and the lights only worked on one side. His 10-year-old son, Ethan, was asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled up to his chin and a paper crown tilting over his eyes. On the table sat a small cake with two candles shaped like little sparklers he'd saved from Ethan's last birthday. It wasn't much, but it meant they'd made it through a hard year, together. He tied the trash bag and opened the back door. The hallway breathed cold air onto his neck, and he braced himself against it as he stepped into the alley behind the building. The air carried 1,000 neighborhood sounds, music thumping 2 blocks over, laughter spilling from balconies, a distant countdown already beginning somewhere. But underneath it all, something else, a soft sound, thin as thread, the kind of sound a person hears with their chest before their ears know what to do. He paused. The alley lamps hummed like insects. Snow melt ran in shallow veins along the cracked concrete. There, again, barely a sound, the whimper of a child trying not to cry. He followed it past the dumpster to the bulging black bags stacked like lopsided soldiers. A tiny shape crouched beside them, trembling. It was a little girl, 3 years old at most, with dark hair tangled beneath a thin-knit hat. She wore a summer dress under a hoodie 2 sizes too big. Her shoes were soaked. She had her hand inside a torn bag, digging carefully as if afraid she'd be caught stealing even from the trash. "Hey," David said softly, raising his hands the way one might when approaching an injured bird. "It's okay." "Are you lost?" The girl jerked, eyes wide. A heel of bread tumbled from her fingers to the slush with a dull, wet sound. She didn't speak. Her other hand clutched a threadbare stuffed rabbit, its ear hanging by a few stitches. The whimpering turned to quick, shallow breaths. "Cold, huh?" David murmured, shrugging out of his coat. "I'm David. I live right there. My son and I we were just about to cut a cake." His voice shook for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. "You're safe. I promise." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders, and the weight of it swallowed her like a tent. She watched his face the entire time, searching for something, danger, a lie the shape of a trap, and finding none. When she finally nodded, it was a slow, cautious gesture, as if she were giving the night permission to be kinder. "Do you have a name?" he asked. Her lips parted and closed. She shook her head. Or maybe she didn't know. Maybe no one had asked her in a long time. "Okay," he said. "No problem. Let's get you warm first." He carried her upstairs, each step a bubble that might burst if he moved too quickly. The apartment door clicked open, and warmth wrapped around them. Ethan blinked awake, disoriented, then sat straight up, the paper crown sliding off his head. "Dad?" "It's okay," David said. "We have a guest." Ethan stared for a second too long, the way children stare when they know something is important, but don't know the rules yet. Then he hopped off the couch and raced to the bedroom. He came back with his own blanket, the soft one with rocket ships, and draped it over the little girl like a cape. "I'm Ethan," he whispered. "You can sit here." The girl watched the cake with the solemn concentration of someone who knew the difference between pretending to have food and actually having it. David cut a slice, larger than he'd meant to, and set it on a plate. He added a glass of warm milk, stirred with honey. She ate without hurry, small bites, as if she were trying to make the moment last. When she finished, she touched the rabbit's dangling ear and looked around the room as though she were memorizing it in case she'd have to find it again from memory. "Where's your mom or dad?" Ethan asked, voice tender but curious. Her mouth trembled. "Light," she said finally, barely a breath. The light went boom. David's stomach tightened. Fireworks? Power outage? Or something else? He crouched to meet her eyes. "Are they hurt?" She stared past him at the window, where bursts of color had begun to flower over the distant buildings. I I walked," she added, as if that was the part he needed to know most. Bunny was hungry, because from that one fragile sentence, everything changed in David's mind. He had once believed that the hardest thing he'd ever done was keep his small family afloat after his wife left. But now another truth took root. Sometimes the universe sends you a person at the exact moment you think you have nothing left to give, and asks gently if you'll make room anyway. "All right," David said, standing. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll keep you safe tonight. Tomorrow morning we'll figure out the rest." He set up the couch with pillows and the rocket ship blanket. Ethan brought over his favorite stuffed dinosaur and placed it beside the rabbit. The girl watched this ritual with wary amazement. When David turned off the lamps, the room glowed with the soft amber of the kitchen string lights. The three of them sat together for the final minute of the year. Cake crumbs on plates, snow whispering against the window. At midnight, when the neighbors cheered, Ethan whispered, "Make a wish." The girl held the rabbit to her chest. "Warm," she said, "and not scary." "Amen to that," David answered. He barely slept. He kept rising to check that she was still there, still breathing, still warm beneath the blanket. At dawn, he brewed coffee and oatmeal, and the scent drifted through the apartment like a promise. When the girl woke, she startled again until she saw Ethan, who smiled as if they'd been siblings their whole lives. She touched the steaming bowl, looked up with wide eyes, and said, "Hot clouds." "Exactly," Ethan laughed. "Eat the clouds." David made calls until the sun crowed over the rooftops and the city shook off its confetti. On New Year's Day, every office seemed to be closed or automated. He left careful messages for social services, for the non-emergency police line, for the only women's shelter he knew by name. While he waited, he studied the little girl's face. There were no bruises, no signs of neglect beyond the obvious hunger and thin clothing, but her silence had weight. When he asked simple questions, favorite color, cartoons, whether she liked peanut butter, she answered in single-word whispers, eyes sliding away. "Dad," Ethan said when they were cleaning up breakfast, "can she stay? Just until someone comes? She can have my room. I can bunk on the couch. It'll be like camping." "We'll do what keeps her safest," David said, the responsible answer. But his voice had a softness that told the truth. He already wanted to say yes to 1,000 things. By afternoon, a woman from Child Protective Services called back. Her voice was warm but brisk, her calendar already full. "We can send someone tomorrow to take a report," she said. "If she's in immediate danger, you should call the police now." David looked at the girl sitting cross-legged on the floor, lining up bottle caps like treasure. Immediate danger? No. But the idea of handing her to a stranger after one night lodged in his throat. "Tomorrow," he said. "Please. And would it be okay if I took her to the clinic today?" She was out in the cold. "Of course. Keep receipts. And keep notes on anything she says." A pause. "You're doing a kind thing, sir." He hung up and exhaled. The clinic was a walk away. The kind of community clinic that kept Christmas decorations up until February. A nurse with reindeer earrings examined the girl, whose pulse hammered like wings. "She's dehydrated," the nurse said gently, "and slightly underweight, but no frostbite. You did the right thing bringing her." She smiled at the girl. "We'll get you warm, sweetheart." By the second evening, the apartment had rearranged itself around her. Ethan taught her a board game with missing pieces and insisted the missing pieces were invisible, super pieces worth double points. David found an old pink sweater of a neighbor's daughter in the laundry room lost and found, and left a note promising to return it. They cleaned the rabbit's ear and stitched it tight. When he asked again about a name, the girl thought hard, like a person turning the pages of a book in her mind. Mara, she said finally. I think. Hi, Mara, Ethan said, as if she had always been that. The next morning, the doorbell changed everything again. A caseworker named Miss Alvarez arrived with calm eyes and coffee breath. She sat at the kitchen table and listened, while David explained how he'd found Mara in the alley. She asked Mara soft questions, never pushing when silence came. She accepted a second slice of cake because Ethan insisted it was lucky. When she stood to leave, she said, "Thank you for keeping her safe. We'll need to locate any family, but until we can, we'll place her with an emergency foster home." Ethan's face fell. David's mouth opened and then closed. The apartment felt suddenly smaller. "Unless," Miss Alvarez added, reading the room with a small smile, "you'd like to be her emergency placement for a few days while we search. It would require a quick background check and a home inspection, but given that you found her and she seems comfortable." The word landed like a lamp switched on in a dark room. David nodded, not trusting his voice. He filled out forms with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. By late afternoon it was done. He would keep Mara until the court decided the next step. That night after Ethan fell asleep, Mara stood at the window, the rabbit tucked under her arm. She watched the stars as if they were telling a story only she could hear. "Do you think wishes work?" she asked, so quiet he almost missed it. "I think sometimes wishes are how we recognize the right door when we see it," he said. "What if the door is afraid too? Then we knock together." In the days that followed, pieces of Mara's past arrived in fragments, like puzzle pieces from different boxes that somehow still fit. There was a tiny apartment with thin walls and a mom who smelled like lavender and sadness. There was a neighbor who played loud music in a hallway where grown-ups argued about money. There was a night when the light went boom, which turned out to be fireworks that made the power flicker and scared her mother so badly she locked herself in the bathroom and didn't come out for a long time. There were days when there was food and days when there wasn't, and there was a rabbit that had always been good at listening. Ms. Alvarez found the mother within a week, alive but in crisis, hospitalized in a detox program after a neighbor called 911. She loved her daughter, that was clear, but love had been outmatched by addiction and grief. The court scheduled a hearing. David listened to the plan: reunification if the mother could stabilize, check-ins, supervised visitation, and agreed with the only thing he honestly wanted, whatever was best for Mara. On Ethan's first day back at school, David walked Mara to the park. Children's laughter rose and fell like waves, and Mara watched from the bench, gripping the rabbit. "You can go play," he said. "What if I don't know the rules?" she whispered. "Then you'll invent kinder ones." A girl with glitter boots approached them. "Want to be the shopkeeper?" she asked Mara, as if it were the most natural question in the world. And just like that, Mara stepped into a game. She stood at the top of the slide and announced the price of plastic apples. She laughed when the glitter-booted girl paid with pine cones. She returned to the bench flushed and a little taller. "I sold 2 apples in a cloud," she reported, very serious, because that small victory would carry them through the next storm. A week later, the court hearing arrived, gray and fluorescent. David wore his only tie. Ethan insisted on drawing a picture of the 3 of them holding hands and tucked it inside Mara's backpack. For power. Mara clutched the rabbit and counted ceiling tiles. The judge was an older man, with eyebrows like quotation marks and a voice like gravel. He asked questions gently, then firmly. He listened to Miss Alvarez, in the hospital social worker, described the mother's condition: improving, hopeful, but fragile. He asked David why he wanted to remain in the picture. Because she was alone, David said simply. And then she wasn't. I don't know what to call that yet, but I know I mean to honor it. The judge nodded slowly. We'll schedule a 90-day review, he said. Until then, temporary custody with Mr. Hayes, supervised visitation with the mother upon release. Outside the courtroom, Mara leaned into David's side as if she'd known the judgment would be this. She didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of day. She just seemed to finally believe that some mornings could be counted on. The first visit with her mother happened in a playroom at the family services office, all soft furniture and primary colors. The woman who entered had tired eyes and a hopeful smile. Hi, baby, she whispered, kneeling. I'm working hard, okay? I'm so sorry. Mara stood still for a second that lasted a year. Then she took 2 steps forward and climbed into her mother's arms. The rabbit fell to the floor like a dropped question. David stared at the scuffed tiles and swallowed his guilt. He was not trying to take anyone's place. He was simply standing in a space that needed a person to stand there. On the bus ride home, Mara put her head on David's shoulder. Can you teach Bunny to count? She asked, as if to set an ordinary task in an extraordinary day. They learned routines, small ones that knit a life. Oatmeal and warm milk, storybooks with worn spines, a toothbrush song Ethan invented that made Mara laugh every time. David discovered the miracle of a hand slipping into his palm without fear. Ethan discovered that being a big brother meant both teaching and learning. Teaching how to ride a scooter, learning the art of pouring imaginary tea with proper ceremony. When Mara had nightmares, David sat in the hallway with his back against her door and told gentle stories about brave rabbits and patient stars until she slept again. 2 months later, Ms. Alvarez arrived with news. Mara's mother was on the path. Keep showing up kind of progress, but not yet stable enough for reunification. She asked me to tell you something, Miss Alvarez added, eyes shining. She said, please thank them for loving my daughter the way I would if I could. That night, David stepped onto the fire escape and watched the city breathe. He thought about doors and wishes, about the price of miracles and the taxes they levy on your heart. He'd spent years measuring himself by what had gone wrong, by who left and what he couldn't fix. Now he measured his days by smaller things. Laughter from the bedroom, crayon drawings on the fridge, the way the word "we" felt in his mouth when he used it about his family. Because the final test of love often arrives disguised as ordinary logistics. In late spring, the 90-day review approached. Miss Alvarez scheduled a home study. The judge wanted to see consistent schooling, regular pediatric appointments, and proof that David's work schedule allowed for safe care. David's job at the hardware store had been good to him, but it didn't cover childcare surprises. He asked for fewer late shifts and picked up early mornings. A neighbor, Mrs. Patel from 3B, watched Mara on the day's work, and school didn't line up, refusing payment except in groceries and gratitude. The night before the review, David lay awake and thought about what he could promise and what he couldn't. He couldn't promise that he'd never be afraid. He couldn't promise that the world wouldn't throw storms at them. But he could promise this. If the universe asked him again whether he was willing to make room, the answer would be yes, every time, even if it scared him. Court again. The judge again. Papers shuffled like birds. Miss Alvarez spoke first. Mara is thriving in Mr. Hayes's care. Her mother continues treatment and requests that Mara remain where she is until she can provide a stable home. Both parties agree to ongoing visitation. The judge looked over his glasses at David, then at Mara, who sat coloring a picture of 3 stick figures and 1 long-eared rabbit under a sun that took up half the sky. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, I believe you understand that families can stretch without breaking. Provisional guardianship will continue for 6 more months, with the option to convert to permanent guardianship or adoption, should circumstances warrant adoption. The word hovered, bright and terrifying. David nodded. He didn't cry there, not in front of everyone, but later on the bus home, he stared at the reflection of the three of them in the window. The man, the boy, the little girl holding a rabbit, and felt something inside him finally unclench. Summer brought long evenings and chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Mara learned to write the letter M with pride. Ethan taught her the secret chant for scaring pigeons, which didn't work, but made her squeal with delight. They visited Mara's mother every week. Sometimes they met in the park, sometimes in the office playroom. Her mother was steady now, softer around the eyes, remorseful without drowning in it. She brought children's books from group meetings and asked David what they were reading at home so she could mirror it. "I'm not ready," she said once, hands twisting in her lap, "but I will be. Or if I can't be, please be ready for me not to be. Please be ready to be her forever." David nodded. He didn't trust his voice. He wanted everything for everyone. The math of love didn't always balance, but he would keep doing it anyway. On a humid evening in late August, they picnicked on the roof with Mrs. Patel and two teen boys who lived on the third floor and insisted on showing Mara how to fly a paper plane like a real pilot. The sunset painted the brick buildings apricot and gold. Ethan, overexcited, declared they should do a countdown to bedtime the way people do for New Year's, just because. 10, 9, 8. On 2, Mara tugged David's sleeve. "Special day soon?" she asked. "What do you have in mind?" She studied her rabbit. "The day I found you." He understood then that her life had two calendars now. The official one with holidays and school days, and the private one with anniversaries only their little family would ever know. "We'll make it a holiday," he said, "the day of warm and not scary." When New Year's approached again, because time, like a good story, loops back to the beginning, David bought a slightly bigger cake. He didn't need 2 candles shaped like sparklers anymore. He bought 3, then a 4th, just in case, because that's what hope does when it goes grocery shopping. He also bought a tiny pair of mittens printed with stars. They weren't necessary now, not really. Mara had a warm coat and boots that fit, in a drawer she called my drawer without thinking. But he bought them anyway because last year's cold still lived in his bones, and he wanted to gift her warmth whenever he could. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the court. Adoption hearing, if desired, scheduled for February. David read it 3 times, then set it on the table as if it might burn a hole through the wood. He called Miss Alvarez, who answered on the first ring. "Congratulations," she said. "Whatever you choose, you've already changed a life." That night, he told Mara and Ethan. Ethan whooped and did a victory lap around the couch. Mara pressed her rabbit's ear to her cheek and looked at David with the gravity of a judge. "Does adoption mean I get to be your always?" she asked. "It means we choose each other," he said carefully, "and keep choosing. Even on days when we're tired or cranky, even when there's broccoli," she considered this. "I choose even if there's broccoli," she said solemnly, then ruined the solemnity by giggling. At 11:58 p.m., the city inhaled again. The 3 of them stood at the window. Fireworks stitched light across the sky like hands mending torn fabric. David thought of the alley, the black bags, the way the universe sometimes hides its miracles in places polite people don't look. He thought of doors and wishes, and of how love is less like a lightning strike and more like weather, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always changing the shape of the ground it touches. "Before we say Happy New Year," he said, "can I ask something? If this story meant something to you, if finding each other helped you believe in kindness again, would you help us spread that feeling? Tap subscribe so we can keep telling stories that make this world a little warmer. Thanks for being here with us." The clock turned. The sky shouted. Ethan shouted louder. Mara cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted loudest of all, "Warm and not scary." The rabbit dangled from her arm, ear securely stitched, witness to the kind of magic that doesn't ask for attention, but transforms everything it touches. When February arrived, the courtroom felt different than before, less like a battlefield, more like a church. Mara's mother stood beside them, hands folded. She had completed her program. She had a part-time job and a sponsor who sat in the back row with a proud, worried smile. She had brought a small box wrapped in tissue paper. "For her," she whispered to David. "For you, too." The judge asked the questions he needed to ask. Did David understand the responsibilities? Did he commit to supporting contact with Mara's mother as appropriate? Did he promise to love, protect, and provide, to keep showing up? Yes, yes, yes. His voice didn't shake this time. Then by the power vested in this court, the judge said softly, I recognize this adoption. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes. Welcome home. Mara. In the hallway afterward, Mara's mother pressed the small box into Mara's hands. Inside was a locket, oval, old-fashioned, the kind that holds a secret. One side had a tiny photo of Mara as a baby, cheeks like moons. The other side was empty. For you to put a picture of your forever, her mother said, eyes bright. I'll be there too, just in a different way. Mara nodded. She didn't cry. Children know how to hold two truths in one body. That love can be both here and there. That family can mean and instead of or. She took David's hand with one and her mother's with the other, and for a moment they stood like that, three people long enough to break a heart and mend it better. They celebrated with hot chocolate at the cafe on the corner. The barista drew foam hearts so big they looked like maps. Ethan insisted they all sign the adoption certificate with glitter pens he'd smuggled along for legal sparkle. Mara wore the locket and announced that her rabbit's official name was Sir Warmington of Not Scary. Months later, when the city flipped the calendar again and fireworks stitched the sky, David opened the window to let the sound in. The alley below was the same and not the same. Bags, lamplight, the familiar hush. But now it felt like a chapter in a book they'd already read, the scar that proved the wound had healed. He lifted Mara onto his shoulders so she could see better. Ethan leaned into his side, taller than last year, still a boy, and also more than a boy. Dad, Ethan said, do you think someone else is out there tonight who needs, a door? I think yes, David said, and I think there are people out there brave enough to open it. Us, Mara said. We are brave. He kissed her hand where it rested on his hair. Yep, he said, we are. If you felt this story, if it reminded you that ordinary people can do extraordinary kindness, stay with us. Subscribe and share it with someone who needs a little warm and not scary tonight. And when the world asks you to make room, say yes, especially when you're not sure you can. That's where the miracles begin.